So I always have seen music as one of God's extraordinary gifts to men and women and children. A gift of self-expression, a gift of communication, of shared experience, well, so many things.
You're an angel at the breakfast table, a ragamuffin home for tea, a princess.
So I think at the age of 5 or 6, as I was just beginning to engage with music, God was very much at work. He'd said in his own God the Creator way, Adrian is going to be somebody that I give the gift of music to. And as long as he's open to me, and as long as he's honest to himself and to those around him, it's going to become the primary tool Adrian has to not just express himself, but to express his love for me.
Sweet and tender flame.
As a very young child, I do remember the sound of my father playing the piano. He would do that not every day, certainly every Sunday he would. He would start by coming downstairs, sitting at our piano and just playing. In fact, it would mainly be hymns, interpreting those pieces of music in his own style. That's what I remember. It's the way he played them. It was all by ear, and he would add into those chords these beautiful elements that undoubtedly influenced me. Then, ever so gradually, I started to find my own way to the piano and started exploring the ways you could express yourself by sitting there and just playing notes, and then playing clusters of notes, then something slightly rhythmic. And step by step, that became my refuge.
You will perform.
What I discovered at music college was that I was capable of writing meaningful and sometimes quite complex pieces of music that interested other students and some of the professors, which was a hugely important thing, because it's all very well having your family and friends saying, "Oh, Adrian, that's brilliant, oh, I love that," and then your peers or your teachers starting to show an interest. As a result of that, I opened myself up to the possibility of actually performing my own concerts. My faith was then and still is a profoundly motivating force. My Judeo-Christian worldview influences everything about me. So my songs very often were about the faith journey as well as all sorts of things that we all go through in life. Faith, an expression of faith, lay at the heart of a lot of what I was doing. So I'd recorded a few solo albums, and they were making quite some impression in the world of Christian music and Christian audiences. I'd like to think what I was doing was really very different from most of what was out there. It certainly wasn't classic praise and worship. The songs were quite complex. I was a musician. I was a pianist, and I brought all of my musicality and piano skills into the way I wrote. So I was getting something of a nice positive reputation as somebody bringing something new to the world of Christian music. And then what happened was that I was doing a performance as part of a big event in the Royal Albert Hall. And unbeknown to me, there was a producer in the audience who'd started to work with a few artists represented by the record company I was with. And he came to see me after the performance and said, "We're really interested in what you're doing. We love the way you play. We love your style of piano playing. Maybe we could come alongside you and produce your next album." I played them what was then the original version of The Passion, which was really very simple. It was piano and voice, and I had a bass player with me. But literally I would sit at the piano and it was like a 25-minute suite of songs, starting with Gethsemane, ending with Jesus Alive, the Resurrection.
John, you're looking tired. Let me draw you closer to my fire.
Then came, of course, the fantastic influence of arrangers and producers who started to say, well, this is what we think this could be. And out of that came the decision to invite the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and very crucially was the choice of rock musicians to join the team, as it were.
The Christ must die, try to understand. The Son of God is in God's hand. John, take your mother now, Mary your son. Stand and be ready, for life has begun. Tell them that when I come down from the cross, death will be over, its power will be lost. Then let the world see my power can set them free.
The Passion, I suppose, and its success, to go back to that word, started that section of my journey where I was a fully fledged composer, singer-songwriter, and it would be the world of the recording studio and the concert stage that would be my life.
Set them free. Set them free.
On one occasion, I was visiting a place that had an annual sort of Christian artist gathering called, well, the place it was in was called De Bron, which means the fountain in Dutch. And I was attending this as a guest artist, so performing and leading a few seminars and stuff like that. And one day there was an announcement that we were going to be invited to listen to a music therapist. I remember her name because it was so typical Dutch, Gefke Golbloed. And if you're listening from Holland, you'd be proud of me because not many people can do that. So Gefke Golbloed was a music therapist and she was invited to speak to us. Now I remember, even to this day, that I'd never heard the words music therapist, but I clicked immediately with the concept. It was like, okay, music, healing, well, of course. You know, the healing properties of music have been so clear and obvious to me ever since I began to listen and participate in the making of music. So yes, it makes sense that there might well be a profession out there that has that title, but I'd never come across it before. So as I sit down to listen to Gefke, my whole being was so open to what she was going to bring, and I was not disappointed. And what I will never forget about that sort of half an hour lecture that she gave us was her description of working as a music therapist in a high security prison in Holland. And the men she was working with were in a section of the prison that was specifically for men with psychological problems, very violent men, some who might well fit the category of never leaving prison. And she worked with drums. And what she described in this lecture was, well, there was no such thing as a typical session, but there would be drums in this room. There would be the 5 or 6 men, each assigned a drum. And she would describe how the drumming between these men would begin, and there would be a clear leader. She would probably lead the beginning of the session, and she would invite the men to sort of repeat and copy what she was doing, and then the patterns would change, develop. And then gradually, as the men became comfortable with each other and with the sound, each man would take the lead, and they'd start to dictate the direction of the rhythm and the playing. And she described this experience of extraordinary self-expression and unity that grew in that room, all with the sound of drums driving what was happening. Very little speech, if any, at that stage. And she would describe how she, with her skills as a music therapist, would sort of oversee, not direct particularly, but oversee the session, so that just as there was a clear beginning, there was a clear sort of bringing back down to an ending. And that as the session ended, they would all sit down and there'd be some debriefing, which is where some of the most extraordinary stories would emerge, as the men felt more able to reflect on what that experience had been like for them. And for a lot of them, it was about the release of anger, anguish, who knows, aggression, but then starting to share some of those stories with each other. And then as a therapist, Gefke would be able to maybe just offer some insights and some tools for these men to cope in their situations, in prison cells or whatever it was they were doing. I sat there riveted by this. And the extraordinary thing is, it wasn't until 10 years after that lecture that I began to think about music therapy as a profession. It would set me on a path where music would still be central to the person that I am, but it would come off the stage. It would be almost recovering a sense of what music actually is. This language of the heart shared between sometimes just 2 people, and to be in a position of facilitating that, offering that as a gift of healing. And I think what happened during my years of music therapy is that I saw in the most wonderful way how God brought all of those strands together and put them into this more rounded place of being able to be in a single room, a music therapy space, in a school in Bath, inviting a child or a small group of people, and to have half an hour where all of those elements would come to be, but this time it would be about other people. It would be about what can I bring to these young people that will cause them to leave this space blessed, enriched. Here's a homemade instrument, and this is extraordinary resonant on this one, so you'll feel that vibration right at the other end of the room. Music therapists work in a variety of environments. They work in hospitals, they work in prisons, they work in dementia care, very powerful in the world of dementia, and we might come on to that later. They work in special needs environments, schools, academies. So there is a sense in which the potential for music therapy as an intervention is very broad. My chosen place of work is special needs school. It is where we are now. It's a place called Three Ways. You could be in this building for your entire school education. You could be here at the age of 4 and you could be leaving at the age of 19. And what that immediately says, of course, is first of all the security of having a place that's almost like a second home. But it also means that for people like me, a therapist sort of embedded in this place, that I can follow that child's journey and that I can be working with that child on and off, not necessarily constantly, for the whole of their time here. Which is where you get that sense of the extraordinary power of relationship and the fact that music can be a bridge between people. It can help to forge a very strong relationship that doesn't necessarily depend on some of the usual ways we think about relating to people. Let's say I'm meeting somebody who has cerebral palsy, has learning development issues, huge limitations in the way they can move, and poor control over fine motor skills. So it's not easy to focus on something and achieve exactly what you intended because the body doesn't necessarily respond in that way. Well, what I have in this room is a whole variety of sound sources, some of which, as long as you can touch or move your fingers or push or blow, you will generate a sound, and it will be a meaningful sound. So in a session with somebody like that, the first thing is I would choose instruments, and we will have worked over time to identify what are the sound sources that appeal. That's obviously an absolutely fundamental part of any music therapy relationship is identifying what are the instruments that inspire. People are extraordinarily different in what it is they like about sound and what they don't like. I'm not a great fan of brass. Some people will spend their entire lives listening to brass bands. I love a string orchestra. Some people don't really like the sound of the violin. In other words, we're very different. So one of the first things that has to happen in a space like this is we find the sound sources that inspire, that motivate. With somebody who has limited control over their movement, I would then surround them with sound sources that are very, very accessible, including instruments that I might present to that person. So let's say, for example, if I have a guitar and it's pre-tuned, I'm going to illustrate that just briefly. So this guitar is pre-tuned to a chord. So if I present that to somebody who has very limited control over their hands and fingers, and they're here and there, and I'm just making sure it's exactly in the right position. It's a lovely sound to which I can immensely quickly add the sound of some chimes. It doesn't sound very beautiful up there. Surrounding this person basically with sound sources that are interesting, that are inspiring, that offer a bit of cohesion. And then my role in this process will be to add to that, to, if you like, invest meaning in what might sound very random, or might be, if a child is bringing a sound and they're not even sure quite what it is that they're generating, my job is to say, well, we're going to bring meaning to that, and I'm going to be the glue, let's say, behind this. I'm going to take the piano or another guitar or whatever, and I'm going to try and add something that will make that feel like a cohesive piece. It's hugely about self-confidence in a world where you live with a lot of people telling you what you can't do, what is not available to you, what your limitations are. The music therapist is saying, no, we're going to explore a world of what you can do, what is well in you, what is functioning. That's where we're going. And within that environment, building this sense of self-confidence, self-esteem, emotional expression for somebody who has very few obvious tools with which to say, this is how I'm feeling, and I don't want to use words. We're going to try and do that through the sounds we make and the pieces we create together. Completely contrasting a session might be, let's say, with a child that's been referred to me for anger management problems. This might be a child who regularly has meltdowns in class. And when a child with quite a lot of physical strength and no control over their body has a meltdown, this is not just a little moment that slightly disrupts the class. This can be a moment of potential destruction of a lot of the equipment in the room. And this particular young person that I'm thinking of as we speak now had huge anger management issues. And if that anger was triggered and he couldn't control it, effectively the sort of the regime that comes into place is that the other children are taken out to a safe place. A member of staff will just do their best to contain the person in question. And they will let loose, because physical intervention is only permitted really when there's the potential for real harm to that individual or somebody else. So that there is a sense in which anger management is an incredibly important part of working with children with special needs that are rooted in let's say, trauma or areas of life that have led them to a place of this suppressed anger. And very often when I'm working with a young person like that, we'll use instruments that can generate a huge amount of noise. Drums is an obvious example. There's a huge, great gong drum here. There's other drums around the room. And one of the lovely things about working with drums is you can tell a child, I've got some very good news. You can beat the hell out of this. I'm going to give you a stick, and you can be as loud and as aggressive as you like with this instrument, because that's what it's designed for. A drum is designed to be hit, pounded.
Can I join you?
So one of the first things we can do in this session is to say, my goodness, this is one place where that aggression can be expressed appropriately. We've got the skin of the drum, we're going to beat that, and hey, what about we do that together? So here's the next part of the equation, is that the adult in the room is not only saying feel free to beat the drum. He's saying, I'm going to do it as well. In fact, I'm going to be as loud as you. In fact, you never know, I might be louder. So together we start to embark on this drumming journey. And this young person begins to sort of reach back into the anger and the frustration that is so often triggered in, let's say, in the classroom. And this time he's beating the hell out of a drum, and we're doing that together, and it becomes rhythmic, it becomes exciting, it becomes creative. And then I might say, hey, you take the lead. Do you want to go faster? Do you want to go louder? Do you want to go softer? And so we're really working together as a little drumming duo. And then after a period of time, I might say, is it okay? I'm going to take the lead. I'm going to take the lead. Listen to me, maybe copy me. So we're now sharing the space. It's not just one person kicking off. It's two people joining in a journey and trying to find a way through. And then maybe after 5-10 minutes, I might say, how about we reduce the volume? What if we come down and do something really quiet? Maybe we take the beater away and use our hands. Hands on the skin can be an amazing sound too, so we do that together. And we're hands on skin and it's suddenly very soft. Actually, it's very beautiful. And then we do a bit of tapping. And then eventually, the energy is expended. We put the instruments down. And if that young person chooses to, we can talk about it. What happened there? What did it feel like? Was it helpful? Was it fun? What did you feel like when you were really pounding that drum? And one of the things I remember so well about a particular child I worked with in this context was that when we pounded this particular drum, it would sound like the beginning of that crack of thunder 10 times louder, and it's sudden and it's shocking. So if you hit something that can make a loud sound really hard and really suddenly, it's very loud and it's shocking, and people tend to go like this. But if you take that same instrument and you have a soft beater and you just sort of tap the skin, because you're doing that gently, the skin vibrates a lot more slowly. And the result of that is that the sound lasts much longer and is much more resonant. And it carries much further through the room, and it sort of gets into the body. We discussed a little bit before now about the way we hear sound through skin and bones as well. So the resonance of that sound is much fuller. And when it's possible to articulate this with somebody you're working with, so I'm saying that because obviously it's not always possible. In this case, what we were able to do was this. We compared the striking of the drum with huge aggression with what it's like to have that meltdown in class. So something triggers it, and that's it. Out of control, and I'll start doing anything I can to get rid of what it is I'm feeling. And that might be throwing something, could be about finding somebody to hit or scratch. Basically, I will be loud and I will be angry and I will be sudden and I will be shocking. But what's the consequence of that? Well, the consequence of that is fear. Probably my own fear, but certainly fear in all the people around me. So what's the result? They leave the room. I'm left alone with my anger and somebody who's trying to keep me safe. And nobody's heard my story. Nobody's listening. They're not listening because it's too loud. What about if there was a mechanism by which I could avoid that first reaction? I could still express myself, but I could do this alternative way. I could say, listen to me. I'm going to play something here at a level where you really have to listen. It's powerful, but it's not shocking. Is there a way in which I, in my anger, can begin to see that if I want to be heard, then I'm going to need to find a way of being heard that isn't going to shock and terrify everybody around me? Because fundamentally, that's the problem, is I want to be heard. I want people to know what's going on inside me. Why am I so angry? What's happened in my life that's brought me to this place? How can you help me find a better place to be? And what we did over a course of time with this young person is we helped him to identify that process by himself. He could say what happened when I hit the drum really loudly and how shocking that was. He could hear the drum when I played it a lot more softly, and he felt that resonance in his body. And then he began to see that actually in class, if he could find a way of, maybe he needed to say to a member of staff, it's happening, I'm getting, you know, but temper that, if you like, that moment of violent response, he would truly be heard, and he'd start to get the support and help he needed to develop as a person and to find a better path forward. Everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has a story to tell. And their story is fascinating. Everybody has a fascinating story to tell. Problem is, how do I tell my story? How do I even get to that place where somebody's interested, where somebody's willing to listen? And I think in this world of music therapy and music making, what I've learned over these years is A, how to listen to someone who struggles with speech, maybe has no recognizable speech, but if they do, are very uncomfortable about using it and don't want to talk about themselves or whatever it may be. I have learned, first of all, to listen, to not be afraid of silence, to not be afraid of miscommunication, because that happens all the time in regular life. We may not get it first time. We may not quite understand what that signal is. Well, that's okay, because that's part of the process. It's that process by which a child or a young person begins to tell that story becomes extraordinary every time. And that might be just through the playing of instruments together, but it might be through the writing of a song together. It might be through listening to a chosen piece of music and realizing that that song reaches so deep into that person that they're almost speechless when they've heard it because it went so deep. It could be around sharing the space with another person and for the first time ever experiencing what it's like to work with other people in a room in an appropriate way, where there's no threat to each other, where there's no mockery, where there's no bullying, just enjoying a social environment, unthreatening, music-driven, that starts to give you an idea that there can be real joy in good relationships with people.
Part of me, a world so full of wonder. Out of my heart, I poured my love for you. In earth and sky, in sun and rain, and